In 1849, at the ruins of Nineveh located in Mosul, Iraq, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard and his assistant Hormuz Rassam achieved a monumental accomplishment: the excavation of the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, the last king of the Assyrian Empire. The fact that they discovered not just any relic but a library carried immense meaning in itself. A library was like a treasure chest compressing history, filled with countless documents and illustrations recorded at the time. Just as they had hoped, thousands of clay tablets were found inside the library. Among these clay tablets, which seemed to contain various stories reflecting the spirit of the age, were some belonging to an earlier civilization than Assyria: the ancient Sumerians. The Sumerian civilization, which began roughly 7,000 years ago, was the first civilization in human history to use writing and to establish city-states. However, due to the lack of understanding of cuneiform writing at the time, the meaning of the inscriptions carved on the tablets could not be deciphered. At that moment, no one could imagine what kind of impact and controversy this historic discovery would bring to later generations. More than 20 years later, in the early 1870s, George Smith, an Assyriologist at the British Museum and an expert in cuneiform decipherment, was deeply engrossed in his research. The old clay tablets unearthed by Layard were still kept in the museum, undeciphered. Smith devoted himself with the conviction that uncovering the identity of the texts left by the people of Sumer, hailed as the first civilization, would not only satisfy personal curiosity, but would carve out a pillar of human history. Passionately delving into the tablets, Smith gradually began to find direction, and the inscriptions that had seemed impossible to interpret for thousands of years slowly began to reveal their secrets. Then one day, while examining the tablets at the museum with colleagues, he suddenly tore off his clothes and began shouting, "I understand what it means! I figured out what the inscriptions on the clay tablets are about." After years of study, Smith finally succeeded in deciphering the tablets. Thus, the world's first epic, the story of the legendary king of Sumerian civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh, was brought to light. On December 3, 1872, Smith read aloud his deciphered version of the Epic of Gilgamesh at an archaeological society. Scholars listening with eager eyes soon lost their composure. Some shouted, some denied reality, and some even stormed out of the society in shock. The reason was very simple. The contents of the 11th tablet that Smith had deciphered were about a great flood. The stories written in the Epic of Gilgamesh, composed about 1,000 years before the Bible, were eerily similar to the story of Noah's flood. What this implied was also simple and clear. The scholars who heard Smith's reading could not help but think naturally. Does this mean that the Bible we know is actually a retelling of the Sumerian myths? God said to the patriarch Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. You shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female." The great gods Anu, Enlil, Ninurta, Enlil, and Enki secretly resolved to bring about the great flood, but Enki revealed the plan through a dream only to the patriarch Utnapishtim and commanded him to build a boat. Utnapishtim promised to carry out what the god had commanded, built the boat, sealed it with pitch, and filled it with every living creature. Thus Utnapishtim's family, relatives, and all kinds of animals and beasts boarded the vessel. In this way, both the Book of Genesis and the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh include accounts of a great flood. Beyond their meaning as mere natural disasters, the details are strikingly similar. That a god revealed the coming flood only to one man. That both Noah and Utnapishtim were patriarchs. That they were instructed to build a vessel to withstand the flood. That they brought their families and every kind of animal aboard. And this is not all. After 7 days, the flood covered the earth, and for 40 days it continued, so that the waters increased and lifted up the ark above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased upon the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Every living thing that moved on land perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. When the appointed time came, the entrance of the boat was sealed, and at dawn black clouds rose on the horizon. The downpour began, mountains and earth roared. The foundations were torn up and dikes overflowed. It had struck the earth with thunder. Darkness covered the world, and the land shattered like a clay pot. The floodwaters overwhelmed mankind, and even the gods themselves were terrified by the might of the deluge. The flood was so overwhelming that everything perished, except for the living beings aboard the vessel. The way the flood unfolded after it began was strikingly similar in both accounts. The rain from heaven ceased, and the waters receded from the earth, and the tops of the mountains became visible. Noah opened a window of the ark and sent out a raven, and it flew back and forth until the waters had dried up from the earth. He also sent out a dove, but it found no resting place in return. After 7 more days, he sent the dove out again, and that evening it returned with a freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak. Then Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. After another 7 days, he sent out the dove again, but it did not return. And God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your family, and bring out with you every living creature of all flesh, that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply." So every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird came out of the ark. The flood and storm lasted day and night until the 7th day, when it finally subsided. All of mankind had turned to clay. Mountains became flat like rooftops, and Utnapishtim opened a window of the vessel to breathe fresh air. He fell to his knees and wept bitterly like a stream of water. He gazed upon where land had been, now turned into a horizon, and anchored the boat for days so it would not sway or move. On the 7th day he released a dove, but it returned. He released a swallow, but it also returned. Finally he released a raven, and this time it did not return. At last Utnapishtim opened the boat and released his family and livestock into the world in every direction. The act of releasing birds to see whether land had reappeared, and then finally opening the ark to free all living creatures aboard. These elements show how the flood story in Genesis and in the Epic of Gilgamesh are closely connected from beginning to end. What must be remembered here is that from the time the Epic of Gilgamesh was first orally transmitted to the time it was recorded in writing, it predates the Bible by at least 1,000 years. When this shocking possibility was revealed, it caused a huge stir in both historical and religious scholarship. The controversy showed no sign of dying down, and sensing a great upheaval, George Smith immediately prepared for further expeditions. With support from the British Museum and the Daily Telegraph, Smith set off again for Nineveh in search of still undiscovered tablets. Historians longed for new tablets containing secrets predating the Bible, while theologians hoped for tablets proving that the Great Flood account in the Bible was the true original. After about a month of excavations, Smith returned, having discovered no fewer than 384 additional clay tablets. A tremendous achievement. The newly uncovered Sumerian myths were more than shocking. Among them were not only further flood stories, but also many tales that seemed to be the prototypes of stories found in the Bible. Dilmun is a pure land. In that land there is no death. There is no sickness, no mourning. The old do not grow feeble, women do not suffer in childbirth, ravens do not caw, and the sound of priests' lament is not heard. The goddess Ninhursag breathed life into the land, and the god Enki brought the blessing of water to make vegetation grow. Dilmun is the garden of the gods. Everything is pure as it was from the beginning. It is drenched with water flowing from the sacred spring, and all life comes forth from there. In Sumerian mythology, the goddess of birth, Ninhursag, and the god of creation, Enki, speak of Dilmun, a paradise where there is no death, no sorrow, no pain. Dilmun shares striking similarities with the Garden of Eden in the Bible. In Genesis, Eden is depicted as the birthplace of the first humans, Adam and Eve, and as a paradise free from labor and suffering. Another intriguing fact is that in the myths of Enki, the Sumerians also mention a place called Eden, meaning the place where the world and civilization began. Some scholars suggest that Dilmun and Eden were later merged into what became known as Eden about 1,000 years later. Thus, even the story of Eden, the biblical cradle of humankind, may have originated from Sumerian mythology. The newly found tablets also revealed that the snake in the Epic of Gilgamesh bore a close resemblance to the serpent in Eden, associated with Satan. To escape death, Gilgamesh sought the plant of immortality, and when he finally found it, he rejoiced greatly. This is the plant that makes the old young again. The king placed it nearby and went to bathe in a spring, to wash off the dust of his long journey. But a cunning serpent came secretly, swallowed the plant, and immediately shed its skin, becoming renewed and strong. Realizing too late, Gilgamesh lamented, "Immortality has slipped from the hands of man." In Genesis, the serpent tempts Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, causing humankind to lose eternal life and inherit toil and death. In both stories, the serpent robs mankind of hope and future, symbolizing humanity's fate as mortal beings who cannot escape death. Genesis also describes how Eve was created from Adam's rib. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." Why the rib was chosen from all body parts has long been debated by scholars. Remarkably, the answer may lie in the Sumerian tablets. Enki fell ill for breaking divine order, and Ninhursag asked him, "My brother Enki, what pains you?" "O mother of the gods, Ninhursag, my rib is hurting me." To heal him, she created the goddess Ninti. In Sumerian, the word ti means both rib and to give life. Thus, the goddess Ninti embodied rib, life, and woman all at once. Sumerologist Samuel Noah Kramer argued that this Sumerian myth about Enki's rib was passed down into the story of Genesis. Although religious groups strongly opposed this claim, the inscriptions on the clay tablets were too clear to deny. Scholars also argued that the Tower of Babel was modeled after the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Ziggurats were monumental step towers built throughout Mesopotamian civilization, with temples on top, serving as central structures of cities. The first of these was the Etemenanki in the Sumerian city of Ur. Built over 4,000 years ago, it was 64 meters long, 45 meters wide, and 30 meters high. Known as the Ziggurat of Ur, it eventually crumbled and was forgotten until rediscovered in the 19th century and later reconstructed in the 20th century. The association of the Tower of Babel with ziggurats like the Etemenanki was not without reason. According to the Bible, mankind built a tower to reach heaven. God, angered by their pride, confused their one language into many, so they could not understand one another, and scattered them across the earth. A similar story appears in Sumerian myth. At that time, mankind walked the land of Eridu, passed through the gates of Uruk, and spoke one language. By the will of the goddess Inanna, they sang in the same tongue, understood each other's hearts without concealment. In the words of gods and men were one. But then the god Enki confounded their speech to establish order and set boundaries between gods and men. Thus, they could no longer understand one another's words and were scattered into different lands and cities. Another striking point is that the patriarch Abraham in Genesis came from the Sumerian city of Ur. The Lord said to Abraham, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." That country was Ur. The fact that Abraham's homeland was the Sumerian city, where the Etemenanki stood, suggests a strong connection. Most historians acknowledge the similarities between Sumerian myths and Genesis, interpreting the latter as a reworking of earlier Sumerian traditions. Many biblical scholars also accept that parts of Genesis were adapted from Sumerian myths, but not everyone agrees. Some argue that similarities are merely coincidences, stemming from the shared worldview of ancient peoples, and that in essence, the two traditions are fundamentally different. Even today, the close parallels between these stories continue to fuel endless debates and theories. Was Sumerian mythology truly the source of Genesis? The ancient mystery remains unsolved. This was Midnight Journey.